Good morning, everyone. Thank you to all of you who are joining us for this webinar titled Protecting Our Children from Hate and Bullying. My name is Cindy Shin, and I'm the CEO of the nonprofit organization called CASey, which stands for Keeping All Communities Informed and Engaged, which is one of the reasons why we're having this discussion today. And this webinar is being held in partnership with the LA Civil Rights Department as part of the LA for All anti-hate campaign. This event is going to be one of many that CASey will be hosting. On the 19th of this month, we're also going to be hosting a roundtable discussion with college students about anti-hate, anti-Asian hate, and mental health. And also next month on the 25th, CASey is going to be having a workshop on that same topic for seniors at the San Fernando Valley Japanese American Community Center. So if you haven't done so already, please follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Our ID is CASey Nonprofit, and stay updated on our future events. Today, we're going to be talking about children and how we can protect and prevent them from hate and bullying. We'll be talking about how all of this also affects mental health and whether or not culture plays a role in perception, reporting, and even intervention. We'll also learn about what schools here in Los Angeles are doing to address and prevent bullying, as well as other programs that are available to the various communities. And today I'm also here as a parent, actually, and I have three amazing children, including two very handsome and smart 6-year-old twin boys who have disabilities and who also happen to be nonverbal. And of course, I want them to live in a world where all differences are embraced, including cultural diversity and disability. And of course, in my line of work, I do the best that I can do to promote diversity and inclusion and host conversations like this to bring more awareness. But also as a parent, I want to make sure that that I stay educated and be knowledgeable about these resources, and also be mindful and aware of these mental health issues and cultural influences, so I can also better respond to anything that may come about. So I hope that all of you who are here, including all the parents, educators, nonprofit organizations who are all here just to benefit from this discussion. And as you can see on the screen, we have a great panel today, and I'd love to introduce you to them. First of all, we have Judy Chiasson. She's the coordinator with the Office of Human Relations, Diversity, and Equity at the Los Angeles Unified School District. We also have another Judy. We have Judy French. She runs the LA office of the PACER's National Bullying Prevention Center. We have Jeanie Chang. She's the founder of Your Change Provider and also an AAPI mental health expert. And of course, we have Rae Jin. She is the executive director of Anderson Munger Family, YMCA. Thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time today out of your very busy schedules to help us lead this very important discussion. This webinar is going to go on for about an hour to maybe an hour 15. So first, we're going to be hearing from our panelists, and at the end, we'll be answering any questions or comments that you may have. So please go ahead and use that chat box or Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you do have a question, please make sure to address that question to the correct panelist. So let's go ahead and start. I want to start with Jeanie, because before we get into the programs and the resources, I want us to have a better understanding of how important it is for us to address and respond to these issues appropriately early on by understanding that correlation between hate, bullying, and mental health. Jeanie?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a privilege being here. It's a big question, right? Mental health, I always like to make sure I define it, because even now still it's misunderstood. But when we're talking mental health, which is health, the WHO says, the World Health Organization says there's no health without mental health. I can't say it any better. So I'm starting right off the bat by indicating that everything affects our mental health, and mental health is an everyday thing. I'm not talking mental illness, which is something different. But mental health, described in the simple definition, is your emotional well-being, your social well-being, and your psychological well-being. So just stating that, and if we're talking about bullying and hate crimes and hate, and even how, and I'll talk culturally in a second, all of this directly intersects with your mental health. And in my experience, in my work, and I don't work with kids technically younger than 10, but working with parents who come in and talk about struggles early on in parenting, bullying and, or, in some sense, meanness, when kids are mean, can happen pretty early. I mean, in some sense, preschool, right? The exposure or that you may have can come in a school setting, especially for the first time, where if you might be pointed out, you're different, or you look different, or you talk differently, or your parents talk differently. So I want to say it starts early. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is those conversations, particularly because I work with parents, need to have those conversations early. And yes, they're learning in school, but who are their first exposure or that attachment, right? Their parents or their guardians, people at home. So a lot of my work when it comes to educating on mental health and having these conversations, and even getting to the point of talking those difficult things like bullying and hate, actually first is prepping the parent and having these they're difficult because they're uncomfortable, and you may not get those easy answers from kids. Some kids still can't process their emotions by saying, yeah, mom, dad, this is how I feel, right? They're going to express it differently. So in a long, convoluted way of answering that, it's critical to be as comfortable early on, even in when you're entering your child into a preschool setting, to be ready to have those conversations, because they may not say, I'm being bullied. They may say things like, oh, this person said something that my coat is red and they didn't like it. I mean, I'm just giving an example. And it's, as parents or people who are, exposed to that child every day, just to understand, to read between the lines. I'm going to bring my Korean culture in a second, but nunchi is a word that I bring in a lot in my work, where parents have to kind of gauge and go, wait a second, my kid was just talking about another kid just saying the coat was red, but are they being made fun of? And so in this day and age, in the midst of the pandemic, it has heightened. I have seen it. Research indicates that. So even more of that awareness to start those conversations early, mainly for the child's well-being. So I'll pause on that note. Oh, Cindy, you're muted.
Hello, sorry.
No worries.
You briefly mentioned culture. So how does this culture affect perception, reporting, intervention, and even like the understanding of bullying?
And see, this is the tricky part. So I'll share in our culture. So I'll say, when I say our, I'm going to talk from the API lens, Asian, and Asian's very diverse. So when I say Asian, just understand I'm talking a very vast population, but particularly in our population, bullying is rampant traditionally in our culture. And I'm going to say that, meaning it's not necessarily in US based culture, but if I'm talking, for instance, from a Korean lens, you see bullying in the workplace, in the schools, and in many community settings early on. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I'm talking about historically the impact of generations. So if we're talking immigrant parents who are raising kids here in the US, I'm a second generation. And so in that sense, that means that I was raised here in the US and my kids are third generation, but I'm impacted by my parents. And what I'm saying that is, I look back at that lens, understanding the intergenerationality of our culture is very big. To understand what it was like to immigrate, first of all, which is traumatic in itself. And then bullying, that word is very powerful in the US culture, but historically, maybe in Korean culture, it's kind of part of the norm. And I don't want to say that to undermine that or just downplay it, just saying the way they see it, there's a hierarchy in certain things. And I tend to see it trickle to the Asian-based families here. And so that's why it's very hard treating it in our circle, because some folks think it's the norm, or they're like, well, what do you mean? This is the way I was raised in Korea. This is the way it is. And so I don't think that's what my kid is experiencing. So I've seen that on the flip side. I've also seen parents like myself, they're like, this is bullying. We need to address this. That's one angle. The other one is you don't report it. The sensitivity in our culture is very much like, ooh, we shouldn't bring this up. This is a little sensitive. We don't think this is right, but we got to follow authority. And there are many a times as a therapist, I've had to be I would say an advocate for a family or a child, speaking to the administration of a school. I'm not knowing exactly what's going on, but I would say that I sense from what the child's telling me and what the parents are telling me that bullying is happening. So I tend to, as long as I get their their written consent, I can speak to the school and say, hey, this is what's happening. Do you know this? And of course, the school comes back to me with like, Well, they never said that, or they never told us that. We don't think so. That's not where we're here. And I go, well, I'm telling you, and I'm speaking on behalf of the family. It's just culturally sensitive. They're not, we're not, it's not the norm for us to speak up on things like this. That's the norm. But now I want to say with the younger generation or second generations like myself, even though we're a certain age, we are speaking up more because we were raised here. And when the cultural norm, someone just asked me about that. I'm going to answer that. The cultural norm of bullying. So that sounds harsh. So let me do the best I can. I know Cindy might understand this. Historically, in something like the Korean culture, there's such a hierarchy. The Confucius, value of filial piety, which is that the deep-rooted sense of duty and obligation to serve your family, serve your parents, serve your elders, is very big in the Asian culture. So for instance, in the Korean society, people might not see a workplace boss who may rant to an employee as bullying because they go, well, he's the boss. So, that's kind of what we see, where in our angle, it is bullying, especially when it's repeated and you're using that authority, right? And the control. And that's what I mean by the cultural norm. It's not like it's accepted. It's just what they see and they think that's part of the workplace or what makes sense. And I hope that makes sense. And school bullying, you see a lot. And again, it comes from the hierarchy of class. And I'm kind of going down that angle and I don't want to talk too much about that, but that is what I mean by the cultural norm.
And in a way, sometimes it's more accepted because of that age difference. And I remember even for myself, because I went to school in all Korean schools in Korea. And I remember back then also, it was kind of okay. And it was normal for your seniors to, bully or be mean to the juniors, but you couldn't really do anything about it because it was accepted.
That's right. That's what I meant. It's accepted because again, you're respecting your elders by not saying anything because you shouldn't, because it looks rude. And even though we're in 2022, that is still very much part of Korean society. And I'm bringing that up because it infiltrates here to the US based on what parents or baby boomers or, even people middle-aged like myself grew up with. I didn't grow up there, but people who grew up here and they're raising their kids here in the US, they're like, well, that's what that's what I had growing up. That's not it. That's not bullying. That's what's supposed to happen. And yet, so what I do a lot is just kind of reframing that lens, saying this is the Western culture, this is the US, that this is the term bullying and naming that for folks. And when I say the word naming, it helps people going, oh, there's a term for it. This is what it is, and it's real, and it directly impacts the mental health of children and families.
And a while ago, you mentioned that, kids may not say the full story or not even want to talk about it to their parents or friends or family, because I think that sometimes there's like that shame or embarrassment that's connected to it.
Mm-hmm. And I got this really good question, and I'm going to answer this too with that shame. Shame is such a big topic. I could do a whole hour on that because it's a shame-based culture. That's another part that prevents people from speaking up about it because they put the blame on themselves. Like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? What have I done to get the bullying? Or maybe it isn't the bullying. Maybe it's me. Now, what if your child is the bullier or the bully, right? What if you're seeing, and I've seen this a lot too, and can be very aggravating when you're trying to speak to parents or guardians of the actual bully. I put a systemic lens on because I have to look at the entire system in place surrounding that child. Does the child have support in place? Is the child themselves being bullied and therefore bullying others, right? There's that ripple effect that happens, and I see that all the time. But then I do make it clear, we do to help your child. Somewhere along the way, there's an attention seeking factor. They're feeling insecure, in some sense, maybe threatened. What's going on in the home? As a family therapist by trade, and that's my core, I look back at what's going on in the home, even if it doesn't look like what it seems, right? It may seem like everything's normal in the home, but I really ask those really probing questions to really get at why this behavior is happening. And again, let's be real, adults are the adults, children are the children. I'm not always going to defend the children, but I do put more emphasis on the responsibility of the adults, and where and how they're modeling that behavior. That's the word, modeling. Whatever comes out of your mouth, we all know our kids will be like, Mommy, you said that. I mean, my kids quote me all the time. So it's all the behaviors are watching you, they're listening, they're seeing what the teachers are doing, they're learning from us, whatever we're doing, whatever we're saying. So hopefully I answered that the best I can. So much to say on it.
We could do a whole new session on that. And I also think that, speaking of culture, it's not, and this is probably going to be for a different conversation, but it's not just for the kids, it's the workplace. And it's also, as an adult, and I've actually, experienced this recently too, but it's like that older generation. It's kind of like, if you try to just, speak your mind or stand up for anything that you feel is right, you get punished for that. So
Yeah.
it's that culture. Right.
I'm glad you brought that up. So some people, I've heard this from folks, and I understand it's hard, but what if they do speak up, Jeanie, and they're met with backlash or even more ridicule? And I'm like, you know what? That is the sad reality of what I am seeing as well. You speak up and there's ramifications, and that's the darker side of things. And you go down that, the rabbit hole there, but that does exist in a culture like ours, where they're like, did she just speak up at me? Did she just talk back? How dare they say that I'm doing something wrong? Because again, you're talking about the elder status of like, I'm older than her and I know better. So well, that's difficult. And that's why there's a lot of that happening, particularly in Korean society. But again, I'm looking at all that because that infiltrates the families here in the US. And what does that look like? Well, we have a lot of work, and that's why education, I'm just going to end there. Education is key. And anywhere you can educate is very important. My job is psychoeducation. So education on psychology, right? Mental health and how this affects your well-being and your growth, your child's growth, right? Is critical to that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking about that. And that's one of the reasons why, we try to have more discussions like this on topics that are often too difficult for certain cultures and certain parents and kids to talk about. And so we need to just create more awareness, and have more discussions like this. And lastly, just do you have any advice for parents? Like if you see any signs that your child may be struggling due to, some sort of maybe hate incident or bullying that they may have gone through, any advice?
I think the key is, and I think I see a question here to make sure I'm not missing that. I want to say that the key is that you want to be the one that they go to first in that sense, right? I mean, I want the safety in the home always. And sometimes that's not possible, but that's the family therapist in me of that goal. So if there is a way, sometimes when as a parent, something's wrong, so you push. That is the most difficult thing as a parent, to not push, going, well, I know something's wrong, I got to find out. I think the key is having a parallel process that you do to be advocating for your child at the schools and talking to teachers. You could do that at the same time while you're talking to your child continually as best as you can in their language, meaning if they're 5 years old, do it in a way that's comfortable for the 5-year-old, going, like, how happy are you today, right? And asking those open-ended questions. Those are the questions where you are almost probed to answer, forced to answer, not a yes, no, I'm fine. More like, oh, how happy am I? Well, Mom, Dad, I'm not happy. And then you can probe further going, oh, why aren't you happy, right? And so those open-ended questions are very important. The second thing I'll say, there's something I like to call reflectively listen. Active listening, sure, you're actively listening. Reflective listening is actually when you are looking at your child and you're reflecting, you're like a mirror image. You're going, oh, my child, they're not looking at me. Oh, they're shifting. You can point that out going, hey, child, I notice you're a little bit uncomfortable. Are you uncomfortable talking about this? Right? I know that's a yes or no question, but you're pointing out what they're doing. And lots of times as parents, we're guilty of this, being busy. Right. And so we tend to not fully being engaged in those, even in those tough conversations. I need to look at everything your child's doing, whether they're looking at you and maybe they're holding back a tear, maybe they're holding their breath in. You can say, why are you holding your breath in? And that's what I mean by reflectively listening. You're mirror imaging everything, pointing it out, talking about it, the verbals and nonverbals, you're doing both. So those two are critical, open-ended questions and reflective listening. And so what I'm trying to say to parents is engaging heavily, because they need us 100% present. And that can be hard, but it's putting down your phone and just being like, okay, I'm here. And again, consistency. So repeatedly doing that.
Right. And
Next day, right?
right. And it's just, for every child and every family, it's going to be a different kind of communication, whether it's a different language, or if it, like in my case, if it's a nonverbal child, then you use storybooks or you use devices. So there are different ways to do that. And, but definitely open communication with your child is something that we need to remember. Thank you so much, Jeanie. And I know that Jeanie also has to be leaving a little bit early today. So for any of you who do have any questions for her, please just go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. So I'm sure Jeanie will be able to help you and address those questions. I want to hear from Judy Chiasson. She's the coordinator with the Office of Human Relations, Diversity and Equity at LAUSD, which is the second largest school district in the nation. Judy, thank you so much for being a part of this. You've been in this field for many, many years, so I'm just so happy that you were able to join us today. Can you just tell us about, reporting guidelines and measures that are taken by school districts, if your child may be experiencing any type of bullying or hate. So please give us that information. Thank you.
Okay, so first let me thank you so much for offering this forum for everybody. It's so critical. I do want to say, I think that the most important thing is we really like to focus on prevention. Prevention is critical. If we only talk about what goes wrong, we're missing the important part. Prevention and response are so they're bedfellows. I also want to acknowledge what Jeanie was saying. I'd like to expand this conversation to not only is my child a target of bullying, but is there the possibility that my child is the instigator of bullying? I think we always think, when we think of bullying, we always point our finger at somebody else and say it's the other child. We never want to think that our child will engage in this. The state of California and actually federal government did this remarkable job of defining bullying for us. And there's some critical components to it. One of them is the level of intentionality. And I know there's a difference between impact and outcome in some respect, but if I were to bump into somebody in the cafeteria on accident and they drop their cafeteria tray versus doing so intentionally is completely different. Yes, I'm going to be wearing my lunch, but if it was an accidental bump, as opposed to intentionality. So bullying has an intentionality to it. With that intentionality also comes with age appropriateness. 4-year-olds, we know that if they see their favorite toy, somebody has it, they go and they grab it, they want it back. That's what 4-year-olds do. A 14-year-old, if they're engaging in that kind of behavior and it's not on the basketball court, it's somewhere where it shouldn't occur, we're going to look at that very differently. And so looking at the age appropriateness, the developmental level of children. So for parents, if their child comes home and they say, somebody didn't like my red jacket, I would just say, okay, tell me more about that. How do we listen in a way that children can talk? If the children if children are not distressed by it, they just go, oh, well, you don't like red, move on. We probably don't want to create, add to their trauma. If there is no trauma there, we don't want to be trauma inducing. If the child is distressed about what happens, then we help them process that. And I have a PowerPoint, but I know I want to be sensitive to time. I would ask the parent, first of all, is like, what happened? Always ask the most important question, what happened before that? Sometimes where we begin our story, we leave out some kind of critical details. So, okay, what happened before that? Okay, and then this is what happened now. How did that impact you? What were you thinking at the time? What are you thinking now? What do you think the perspectives were of other people involved? And what do you think we can do to make it right? What should be done? So it's as we engaging students and our children in this little thought process to think critically about what happened. Of course, we always want to report an incident to a school or our suspicions. The school is obligated to look into it. It is based on their investigation. Would they make a determination whether it met the legal criteria of bullying? I want to be very, very clear, though. We can have all kinds of misconduct that does not meet the legal criteria of bullying. In fact, there's such emotionality around that word. I actually encourage parents, don't use that word, because when I say bullying, when you say bullying, we all get a mental picture. What I prefer, what I recommend parents do is they define the behavior. What is the behavior that happened to that child? Somebody pushed my child down. They were outside playing. They pushed them down. They were in the lunch yard. It happened about 12:30. And so very specific behaviors that the school can understand. Everybody conceptualizes that. We all have a shared mental image when I describe being pushed down. Okay. That really helps facilitate those conversations. Now, the school will look into it. They will talk to your child. They will talk to witnesses. They'll try to get a sense of what happened. And most importantly, what can be done about it. And so that would be reaching, maybe support for your child, maybe support for the other child. Maybe the other child is feeling really dysregulated. We have seen some changes coming back to school after the stay-at-home orders. A lot of our children have lost their social skills. When we're at home, we engage in all kinds of behaviors that maybe in a public setting, we would have a little more, censorship about what we say and how we act, and what we're sensitive to, right? Because we know how to function very well in our families. You go out, you meet with hundreds of other people. It's a different skill set. So supporting our children in that. And then the last little tidbit I'd like to talk about is the difference between teasing and bullying, right? So if we think about it, when do you develop your relationship with somebody enough that you can start to tease them, right? When is it that somebody crosses that line into friendship? And now we can just kind of mess with them and we say these little jokes that if somebody else said those jokes, it would be really mean. But there are liberties that we take with our family members and the people that we love, which are actually, a sign of intimacy and closeness. And the difference between teasing and bullying is there a relationship there, or is there a desire for a relationship, right? How we kind of joke around a little bit. Are we trying to form a relationship with this person? But most importantly, the differentiating variable is what happens afterwards, right? If I said something very inappropriate, and Cindy, you said to me, wow, Judy, that really hurt my feelings. If we were in a friendship or I wanted a friendship with you, I would say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. And I would never say that again. It has been resolved. If somebody was engaging in bullying and we had that same dialogue, I might go, really? That bothers you? Great, that's my intention. I'm going to do it more. So how do we resolve these, address them when they're still in their little levels in the beginning stages? That's going to be our really strong indicator. We all have different levels of what we consider to be allowable. And we have to tell people what works for us. Some people are very comfortable being teased. They can go back and forth and engage in that repartee. Other people don't like to do that. So we have to communicate that. If it is bias motivated, right? If it is related to one's identity, the investigative process is a little bit different. The school probably won't call that bullying. What they would call it is discrimination, right? So we're not gonna get stuck on those words. Is it bullying? Is it not bullying? We're just gonna really say, was it appropriate or inappropriate, and what did we do about it? So if it was identity-based, we look at it through the lens of discrimination. Right? So does that answer your question? I know I just dumped a lot of information right there.
It's such a sensitive issue, and it sounds like even for investigating that sounds like it's a pretty tough job too, because it's like how much information can you get from a young child, but even, a child that has disabilities, especially with, my kids, because they're nonverbal, that must be very difficult. And you also have those cultural differences, like Jeanie was talking about. You have these kids who may be reluctant to even like give you all the information too. So
that's why it's so important that the person who does the investigation is somebody that the child trusts. If they're nonverbal, we engage in drawing. We also talk to witnesses, other children, other adults, and we have a lot of places from which to draw in that information about what happened. We can also monitor because we're there, right? The students are right there, so we're able to monitor and either make sure it doesn't happen again, intervene, and try to understand what happened at that time. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that we're not able to reach a conclusion, right? A determination. It doesn't matter. We're still going to give that mental health support to that child, right? If the child is distressed, it doesn't matter whether they've been identified as being a target of bullying or the instigator of bullying. If a child is distressed, we want to give mental health support, period. It doesn't matter any of those labels. If they need it, we're here for them.
I wanted to expand a little bit on your prevention and education training programs at the school district. I know that during our conversation, you were talking about storybooks too, and like what kinds of programs or efforts do you guys have to educate people on, embracing the differences?
Well, we take that very seriously, and that is 90% of my job, is doing the prevention, because I really believe that prejudice and hatred, they need darkness. They live in the shadows, and the more that we can personalize each other, the more that we become human beings to each other, the less likely there is going to be that type of bias. Just strictly, there's a couple different ways, couple different strategies. One of my particular office, and I'll put it in the chat, my website, is we have supplemental teacher lessons. And we've got about, oh my goodness, I need to hop over to my notes for just a second here. I think I've got about 50 different lessons that are somehow inclusive and affirming of the AAPI community. Like, for instance, right now on my website, I have a lesson on Bodhi Day, and I have a lesson on Lunar New Year. That seems like this in its totality of just being one of many types of holidays and identities. We'd like to elevate visibility. Like, we have a lesson on Vincent Chen, who was one of the first, Chinese Americans who was a victim of a hate crime. He is in our calendar of commemorative events on the district calendar. So we look for multiple opportunities. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name. The first woman to lead up I'm sorry, I'm not a sports person. I believe she's Korean, and she's in charge of a baseball league.
I'm not into sports either, so I can't help you with that.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to put it in the chat. So we'll have a little story on her, right? All of these like voices of. So I resist representing a community strictly by their trauma. Let's talk about strengths. Let's talk about visibility. Let's build relationships. All of that is on the prevention side, right? Now, we also have the intervention side, which is teaching about bullying, teaching about kindness, teaching about positive relationships, implicit bias. We have a lot of those. We have a 10-part series on for teachers on this is on my other screen that I can't get to. I'll pull up the name of it, but it's a 10 lessons for teachers on supporting or teaching about or for the AAPI community and identities and history, and it's very well, 10 sessions. It's very comprehensive.
Do you guys also have any in-language services or materials that people could go to?
Yes, I put those in the chat as well in a few minutes. I do have in-language bullying, a form, reports of bullying allegation for parents to complete. Those are in language, and so parents can complete those and submit them to the school. And of course, we do have translation services, so a parent doesn't need to fill out that form. They just need to communicate it for us. In terms of our mental health, we do have some practitioners who, I believe we have some who speak some Vietnamese, some Japanese, some Korean practitioners. It's not as dense, as prolific of our mental health practitioners who are multilingual that I would like to see, but we're working on that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all
thank
that
you.
information for us. I appreciate that. Okay, let's hear from our other Judy, Judy French. Judy runs the Los Angeles office of the PACER's National Bullying Prevention Center, where she coordinates a lot of outreach to schools, health organizations, and a lot of other community groups as well. Judy?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Hi, other Judy. That's Judy is not a name that like went past the 60s or 70s very much. So we always have to greet each other. But thank you so much, Cindy, for organizing this and for having me. I think I will share my screen in a minute. Why not? I did it, so I'll bring it up. But I just wanted to say how very much of an overlap there is for what we're all saying here. I am a former educator, so my solution to so many things is let's educate it. Let's get the learning out there. There is still a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about what is bullying, what is conflict, when does it start? I remember when my daughter was in preschool, the behavior that I would see between the kids. I asked, the teacher, when does puberty start? Because like I saw behaviors that I swore, I was a middle school advisor at the time, and I saw behaviors that I thought looked way beyond. But we don't use the word bullying to describe behavior until a child is old enough to know that they can actually cause hurt or harm in another person. So that's very key in terms of that early learning. But let me back up just a little bit and share my screen and tell you about PACER and where I'm coming from. So PACER, let me just move over to, hang on, let me just get to this actual screen. So Cindy, you guys are seeing actually just the slide, correct? Okay, great.
Yeah,
all right. Okay, thank you. So PACER as an organization, our parent nonprofit, has been around since the late 70s. They were formed to help parents of children with disabilities navigate the public school system in Minnesota. And because of that, because children with disabilities are bullied at a much higher rate, we've been doing bullying prevention work all along and assisting with intervention. Our core value is to teach parents to be good advocates for their kids, and then for parents to help their children learn to self-advocate. So that's a very core to who we are. And that's for children who may, in many other aspects of their life, have difficulty expressing themselves. We work with all types of children, and it's still that value of self-advocacy is very important. We became intentional for all children with disabilities without in 2006. We want to create social change around this idea that somehow bullying is just something that happens in childhood. And, if you get through it, you'll be stronger. That's one of those misunderstandings that's still out there in the world. Everything that we have that you can get off of our 3 websites, and I put the links in the chat, it's all free and downloadable. We don't sell anything. A couple times a year, we have t-shirts. And if you want a bulk order of, posters or bookmarks or something like that, we will charge a little bit for that. But all of what we have is free and downloadable. And what we do is we take research-based articles and good research and turn it into content that anybody can access and understand and use in their community, because what we want to do again is empower the community to advocate for the kids. We are devoted to K through 12, to the childhood bullying experience and trying to reduce that as much as possible. So those are our 3 websites, definitely developmentally appropriate, and that's something very important to keep in mind about what kids can understand and about what they can act on. In all cases, for an issue like bullying, adults need to be involved. It is up to us to help resolve those situations healthfully. Conflict is different, and it's important for us to realize the difference and educate ourselves around the difference between conflict and bullying. I spend a lot of time doing that when I go to speak to parents and faculty staff. There are still a lot of adults who really don't know the difference between conflict and bullying. And then, of course, between bullying and discriminatory harassment, very difficult. People still really need to be educated as to what those things are. Judy brought up the fact that the state of California and our government have attempted to define this and define it well for us. And that's very key. Stopbullying.gov is a great site, also relies on good research to inform the contents that's there. And you should look at those definitions. It's very important that we all speak from the same page. And what happens is, as Judy says, we go out there and we throw out a word like bullying, and everybody has a different picture in their head. Everybody has a different picture of what bullying could be. My parents' generation, it was all physical. But we know now, there's a recent study out of the University of Missouri by Chad Rose, that one of the most prevalent forms of bullying is social exclusion. So it's not what we always picture. So we have to be very careful. And as Judy said, we really do need to focus on behaviors. That's key. So let's look at the AAPI statistics here. Stop AAPI Hate is a great organization. They do, I believe it's an annual assessment. They have a self-reporting tool as well. These are just some general statistics. And interestingly enough, this morning, LA County released the report at 10 a.m., released a report on their hate crimes report, which sadly revealed the highest level of hate crimes in almost 20 years. And in terms of the AAPI community, let me just get to that statistic for you. Crimes targeting Asians grew 67% and comprised 16% of racially motivated offenses. So in 23% of these crimes, the suspects blamed victims for the COVID-19 pandemic, which is what we've seen since 2020. People are concerned, and people are concerned, of course, because we know that social behavior is learned, or the norms are set by people seeing other people's social behavior. So over the years, these last 6 years or so of watching the norms shift towards, again, actively scapegoating, very publicly and without apology, scapegoating certain groups for the pandemic or for terrorism or whatever, that has become quite a part of our daily conversation for people. Our children notice that. They notice those norms. They see where our social behavior has changed, and they do bring that to school with them or bring that to their groups. And so we have focused for the last 6 years, we shifted our focus to how do we promote the creation of healthier communities? How do we promote the things that are foundational to preventing bullying? Because as Judy Chiasson said, if we're only ever speaking about intervention, we'll never get ahead of it. I think we should be thinking 6 steps ahead of bullying. We want to be that far ahead of it happening. And so we've been focusing on pro-social behaviors, positive social behaviors, the things that create connection in community. And my phrase that I've been saying for the last couple of months, and I'm writing content on it right now, is connection in a community, people caring, or at least knowing each other, active relationships with one another, connection and prevention for less intervention. That's my new motto, my new slogan. I'm working on that. Because we really must be focused on prevention. That's who we are. But I'll have to tell you, and I learned this really in stark detail during the pandemic, there's a whole bunch of people out there that don't believe we can prevent bad things from happening. And so now when I go out to speak on prevention, I have to include this question at the beginning of my presentations. Do you believe that you can prevent something like bullying from happening. And then deconstruct it from there, the discussion about it, because bullying is a learned behavior. And again, we learn those social behaviors through viewing social behaviors. So we should be asking ourselves as thinking people and caring people who want to bring children all the potential out of them, have them grow and flourish without bullying. We should be asking, what else could we be teaching? How could we be teaching it? Where do kids learn these things? And of course, school is an incredible laboratory for social development. So really quickly, bullying versus harassment, or the legal term of harassment. This is just something for you to know. We're focused here on disability harassment, but the protected classes below include race, national origin, sex, disability. So if your child, if what they're suffering at school from another person or a group interferes with their education so much that they can't take part in their education, they don't want to be at school, it has damaged their health in some way, then it can reach the threshold of discriminatory harassment if the bullying is based in their identity. So something to be aware of. I am not a lawyer. I know there are lawyers on the call. You could take that on and talk about that some more. But I think it's really, really important, again, when we're discussing what is conflict, what is bullying, that there's then this extra piece of discriminatory harassment. Again, you'll want to really educate yourself if you feel like that is coming into the conversation for your child. Really quickly, I know Cindy asked about this before, but if you think that something's going on with your child, and as a parent or an educator or a professional working with children, when your antenna go up, pay attention, right? Because often when children are suffering through some kind of social disruption or something big like bullying, it presents a bit like depression. So they'll lose interest in things that they formerly really enjoyed. They don't want to be on the bus, if that's where the bullying's taking place. Maybe their grades go down. And we should also remember it's the same for us. If we're suffering through a big problem, a big relationship issue in our lives, or suffering through our job situation or financial situation, it's very difficult for us to focus on the things that we enjoy or enjoy anything at all. You may see sleep disruptions, eating disorders. You may see an instant illness, right, pop up. They were fine, they don't have a fever, but now all of a sudden they're too sick to go to school. Things like that will trigger your adult antenna going up. But certainly things like depression or anxiety, those are the clues, some of the behavioral clues that we have. And then, of course, suicidal ideation, which is far down the line. We want kids to have support, to feel that they're not alone. But if kids are voicing, self-harm or any of those ideas, or you feel as though they've spiraled down and they are so self-isolated, that's time to get in there. And, you really have work to do at that point and get some help for the mental health situation. Again, this is my new mantra: connection within the community, prevention, having a prevention mindset. Let's think about, how do we get everyone connected? We don't have to all love each other, but we need to be creating a community safety net, because the research is also telling us that the solutions to bullying are layered. Everybody has a part to play in a community. It doesn't just take one person to fix it. We really need to all be working on it daily as adults, modeling, which is no fun. I realize no one wants to hear that, but we have to be modeling the behaviors we want to see, and then having specific and targeted interventions for folks when necessary. And I do want to direct you to one thing that we have that still you can find information on. We did a big campaign on stigma of identity-based bullying with Cartoon Network over the last few months, and you can still find information on that. What we asked kids to do was redraw their world, revision their world without bullying, and to send us those ideas. And you can still, there's a bunch of lessons, there's a bunch of guides for adults to work with your children through that and talk to them about what that might look like. Because that's another part of it that we really need to do. We really need to think about a world where bullying does not happen as often. What does it look like? How do people treat one another? If we don't have those pictures in front of us, we can't do the parts to get us there. So believe in prevention. I certainly do. And anything that we can support you, and please visit the websites. We will try and get you all the information that you might need to empower you in your community and to help you create self-advocacy in your children. Oh, one other thing, we have a great resource tool that will help scaffold difficult conversations. And we have a lot of information for parents and educators as well on getting through the conversation of getting the information out. It is really hard, and it's almost harder with your own child to do it, but we have a great tool called the Student Action Plan. 3 steps is a great tool for teaching self-advocacy. So please go take a look at that as well. I'll put a link in the chat.
Yeah, please, if you can add all that information in the links to the chat box, as well as if you want your contact information too, because I think that
Sure.
there are a lot of also community organizations who are either on this call or who will be seeing this this video. So I encourage you and everyone to, and all of us to work together to collaborate, because there are a lot of, language barriers and cultural barriers as we're talking about. So I would love for us to all work together. So those of you who are on this call, if you guys are also interested in, partnering up with all of us, just please mention that in either the chat box, or there's a survey that's going to be going out later on too, so you can add it there as well. Thank you so much, Judy, for that presentation. Last but not least, we have Rae Jin. You're the first Korean American executive director at Anderson Munger Family YMCA, which is located in the heart of Koreatown. And the Y, you guys offer so many different after-school programs and even daycare for little ones. And it's kind of like a second home for many kids. So I'm sure you guys have some sort of, prevention or bullying, hate, educational programs that you guys offer to students or staff, if you can talk about that.
Sure. Hi, welcome, and thanks for including the Y in this space. As Cindy shared, we're in the heart of Koreatown, and very uniquely with this Y, it sits in a community where a lot of different zip codes coagulate or are the community center of all the rich things that we offer. And knowing that the Y's work is, I don't know if you would understand or know, is that there's 3 areas of focus. And the 3 areas of focus that the Y works on are youth development, it's healthy living, and its social responsibility. And in the youth development field of the Y's work, it's really large. It's large, from after school programs to summer day camps to child activity centers that we have at these Y's. So we're always forward facing with children. And there is a robust training that we have for staff in terms of diversity, inclusion, and especially bullying. And it's a huge part of the training, because we have to be bystanders and recognize and be aware when things happen and report to either the school that we're working with or to help facilitate and mediate that. So, with that being said, the Y has many programs, and Judy stated at her last slide, I actually wrote it down, is that you have to work with a community, or connecting all the community members to one another that desires also these adult behaviors that we want to see. And the Y's being inside of this community, or it could be not the Y, but any organization that has programs that promote good behavior, that promote experiences. And I would say more of the experience really dictates or transforms a child's or children or a person's direction of how they want to essentially make decisions of their behaviors, right? And The Y in Koreatown, it's only 8 years old. So there's a lot of work and education earlier that Jeanie had talked about, is, letting the constituents know that the Y is not just a place to work out. The Y is not just a place to swim, and that's what you see. But inside of that, there is impactful programs that really transforms the lives of children, that really helps dictate their behavior to either bullying or not bullying, or even seeing it to intervention, or being a good partner to friends of like, that's probably not even a part of the conversation because the respect level is there. And then we talk about, sports in the AAPI community, working with the Y for so long, I don't see a lot of AAPI faces. However, like it's about sportsmanship, it's about teamwork. You learn about these things, and you have adults that's not your parents as a role model, and you get to really. It could be a very transformative experiences, and that includes some of the camp programs that we have. And a lot of the Ys do have camps in Big Bear, and that's also a transformative experience for a child to be outside of the environment in which they're in, to really see that stars and the snows that they have. So what I'm trying to get to is all these. We could talk about it. There's education portion of it, there's prevention measures, and there's also experiences that we have available in the community, these resources. It could be the Y, it could not be the Y, but any of these programs that can really help transform these kids to experience working with other kids that's not at school or not in their community, but with diverse communities, so they can learn about different kids, what their likings are, and such. And I'm a big advocate for this, because as a young child immigrating from Korea to here, was I bullied? Yeah, I was back many moons ago. I was that child that had the different name, if you will. And has that been a traumatizing experience for me? Absolutely. I still remember to this day. And hence why I'm doing this type of work, is to get all these things out there so that we could be a part of the solution to prevent this from happening anywhere, right? And did that bullying lead me to become a bully back then? Yes, it did. It did, because now there's this thing of feeling power. There's a power in it. Was I called out for it? Was there a mediation? Absolutely. Did that stop my behavior? It did. And it has that child, for me back then, it was a middle school, reflect all these type of scenarios and actions and behaviors that I executed that it wasn't me. And so it's really important that when people see these bullying type of behaviors, and to intervene. And going back into one of the trainings that we have with the Y, I don't know if you've seen this Burger King commercial. It's fabulous. I don't think it's not a commercial, but it's about bullying, right? It's the scenario has at this Burger King, it's all set up, but the customers didn't know what was happening. And so they got a group of kids there, and one kid's being bullied. So that's the scene, right? And you have adults there eating, and they're just watching, intervention, not so much. So around that same time, Burger King employees would bully a Whopper, smashes that Whopper, right? And serves it to them. And they're like, they go to their seat and they're opening up their Whopper, and it's like, well, what's this? Takes it back and says, what's going on with my Whopper? The employee brings another Whopper, brings it out and smashes that right in front of the customer. I just bullied your Whopper. And so the interesting finding about this setting was that 12% of the adults that were in that scene did not intervene. Only 12%, intervened. 90-something% intervened when their Whoppers were actually being bullied. And so what that frames is, if we are seeing this thing that really distracts us, think about others when we intervene, how they would feel. And majority of the percentages are children remember and feel that they are being supported when their friend stands up for them, their teacher stands up for them, that there are people standing up for them. And so I say that in the perspective of an AAPI too, because not only would we have names that are very different, it could be either very short or it could be very long. The enunciations are also different, and children at a young age, they might think it's funny. You know, it may be also be really, it could be hurtful too. And so placing children and parents in a diverse setting where cultures are talked about, foods are being shared, relations and connections are being happened. And I see that a lot at the YMCA. And so I do see a lot of the positive relationship. Kids are going to each other's birthday parties, and it's a method of really leading any community forward in that essence. And so I'll stop there.
No, that was, thank you so much, by the way, for sharing your own personal story. I think that just a couple of things is that just, you know, we've been talking about how it's so important for, you know, parents to be involved and to be educated and just to be aware of, you know, a lot of things that are going on, as well as resources. But I think back in the day with our older, you know, parent generation, it really wasn't because of our culture. They didn't really talk about these things enough, you know, at the dinner table, or just even, you know, having one-on-one time with your children.
Right.
So I think
there's a scenario. I would agree with you. We lived in a low-income neighborhood, and the laundromat, when you have laundry in where we lived, I was at another location, a laundromat, if you will. And I do recall a teen, right, comes and for no reason and says a curse word to my mom and then leaves. But you know, the vivid what I remember, she didn't do anything about it. She just sat there and ignored the whole situation. I was just like, what happened?
right. And that's when you think about it, that memory is kind of traumatizing for you too, which is why it's so important that, you know, with our children, we make sure that we have these open conversations and also intervention. I think that this is a very important thing too, because I know that, you know, Judy French also, she posted some information on the student action plan. I think it's really important also for us to encourage, you know, I guess more bystander training and intervention, education and training. So I think that's very important for us to always be aware of and to know about. Thank you so much, Rae, for sharing that story. And we do have a few more minutes, but I do want to address this question that came in. I thought it was really interesting. I know that Judy Chiasson, she did write a response here, but Judy, can you, I know that you're still here. Can you just briefly talk about that? It's the role of media. You know, I think it's really, especially because we do have a few members that are here from the media too. How does that influence or promote any type of, you know, bad behavior, what we see and our kids see on social media or news media?
Well, you know, we've been complaining about the influence of media since they built the printing press, and I do not exaggerate. When the printing press came, there was all kinds of worry that this was going to be the downfall of society. I think that media has a very powerful voice in positive representation as well as negative representation. I believe that what is more critical is what happens afterwards, is the social response to the incident rather than the incident itself. So if somebody engaged in an act of bias on a TV show, for example, and it was highlighted in media, if the response to that is overwhelmingly calling that out, criticizing it, and saying this does not represent who we are, it's actually good because it works as a teaching tool. That being said, I think the most responsible thing to do is to all of us and teach our children to be critical consumers of media, to sit down with them when they look at these shows and say, what is the representation? Are you getting a positive representation that you want to follow? Or maybe a negative representation in which you say, gee, I would never want to be like that. Sometimes we get bad examples and it's an aha moment for us. And we can look at that and say, I will distance myself from it. The research on whether violence in media causes violence does not seem to really be substantiated. There's some research that feels that people who who have violent tendencies will seek out violent representation in, video games and such. So that seems to be the draw of it. So it's not so much the representation as what we do with that information that matters.
And I'd like to ask you one last question, Judy, because I know, speaking of media, just with, unfortunately, there have been a lot of, hate motivated tragedies that a lot of us and our kids unfortunately have to see and hear about through the news too. Do you guys have any type of counseling related to that after those types of events for your children?
Absolutely. So I do work in student health and human services. So I am the only non-clinician, non-mental health professional on my team. So we do speak first from the social emotional for the mental health. We have a lot of resources that we are always pushing out to other schools following a critical incident. So it's on the top of their email box, like how to talk about community violence, how to talk about gun violence, how to talk about loss. We're trained in grief response, grief counseling. We have a plethora of resources available after the fact as well, and those are in multiple languages.
Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
So let's go ahead and conclude this discussion. Thank you everyone for being part of this webinar. Like I said, please follow us on KC Nonprofit to get updates on our future events. We'll also be launching this new initiative called Smile Say Kimchi, which of course, through the sharing of food and culture, we're going to be bringing people from all walks of life to bring awareness and discuss a lot of important issues to the AAPI community, such as mental health, disabilities, and anti-Asian hate. So we're very, very excited about that. And we'll be having a lot of these types of discussions and events throughout the year in the various communities of Los Angeles. So please stay tuned for that. We'll also be continuing to work closely with the LA Civil Rights Department and their, of course, amazing executive director, Creed Maddox, who has really taken off and has done so much with this department that just launched maybe just a couple of years ago. So it's been an honor, of course, working with her and her team. We will be continuing to partner up with them on events like this. And like I said, there will be a survey that's going to be going out to you as soon as we close this session. I encourage you to please, all of you, fill out those forms and just with feedback. So we also know what types of discussions that we should be hosting in the future, because we want to make sure that all of you get the needed resources and information in your communities. Thank you, everyone, to all of our panelists as well. And I look forward to collaborating and working with you more again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being part of the solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.